The day my daughter, Tiffany, told me I had to move out was the day I realized I had raised a stranger. I worked 30 years as a registered nurse to pay off every cent of my $500,000 home. But while I was weak, recovering from hip surgery, they tricked me. They did not just want a room for her influencer career. They stole the deed and turned my sanctuary into a luxury walk-in closet. However, they made one massive mistake. They forgot about the land. My late husband, Bill, was a cautious man. He deeded the house and the surrounding lots separately. So, I acted. I did not sue. I simply built a heavy iron fence across the only driveway. And then, I hired a contractor to cap the septic line on my property. The house became a beautiful, expensive, smelling disaster. No water, no bathroom, no deliveries, just a fancy closet in a house that was legally uninhabitable. Before I tell you the heartbreaking way she begged to come back after her husband left her, I would love to know, what state are you watching from today? Please, share your home state in the comments below. They say that home is where the heart is. But for me, home was much more than that. It was 30 years of sweat. It was 30 years of tears. And it was 30 long years of working double shifts as a registered nurse. I remember the nights, the endless nights in the emergency room, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of monitors beeping, the heavy weight of my nursing clogs as I walked miles and miles through hospital hallways. I did it all for a reason. I did it to build a life. My late husband, Bill, and I bought our house back when the neighborhood was just quiet streets and young trees. We had a dream, the American dream. We wanted a place where we could grow old together, a place that was truly ours. Bill was a steady man. He was a cautious man. He always used to say, "Margaret, a person is only as tall as the land they stand on." We worked together like a team. We saved every penny. We skipped the fancy vacations. We drove the same old station wagon until the doors nearly fell off. And finally, the day came. I remember sitting at our worn oak kitchen table with a cup of black coffee. I signed the very last mortgage paper. That house was worth $500,000. But to me, it was priceless. It was paid off. Every single brick, every blade of grass. It belonged to us. When Bill passed away 5 years ago, the house became my sanctuary. It was filled with him. I could see him in the way the sunlight hit the porch. I could hear him in the creak of the floorboards. It was my safety net. As a nurse, I had spent my life taking care of strangers. I had held the hands of the sick. I had comforted the grieving. I thought that in my old age, my home would finally take care of me. I was proud. I was 65 years old, and I did not owe the bank a single cent. I had a beautiful garden. I had neighbors who knew my name. I had a life built on a foundation of hard work and honesty. I never imagined that the greatest threat to my peace would come from my own blood. I never thought that my own daughter, Tiffany, would look at my life's work and see nothing but a business opportunity. I loved that house. It was not just real estate. It was my history. It was the legacy Bill left for me. It was $500,000 of security, or so I thought. I believed that because I had given my life to my family, they would respect the roof over my head. I was wrong. So very wrong. They say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I never understood that saying until it was far too late. After my husband, Bill, passed away, the house felt far too large. Every room was a museum of memories. The silence was heavy. It was a silence that followed me from the kitchen to the porch. I spent my days tending to my roses and my nights watching the news. I was lonely. There is no other way to put it. I was a 65-year-old woman living in a $500,000 house with nothing but the ticking of the clock for company. Then came the phone call. It was my daughter, Tiffany. Her voice sounded small. It sounded desperate. She told me that the economy was too hard. She said that she and her husband, Derek, were struggling to keep their heads above water. Rent in the city was sky high. Gas prices were rising. They wanted to save for a home of their own. They wanted the American dream, just like Bill and I had. Tiffany asked me, "Mom, could we come home for a little while? Just until we get on our feet?" My heart leaped. I did not see a trap. I only saw an opportunity to be a mother again. I imagined Sunday dinners. I imagined the sound of laughter in the hallways. I thought about the future. Maybe there would even be grandchildren soon, I told her. "Of course, honey. This house is your home too." I spent a whole week preparing. I scrubbed the floors until they shone. I bought brand new linens for the guest suite. I stocked the pantry with all of Tiffany's favorite snacks from when she was a little girl. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted them to feel loved. I wanted them to feel safe. When they arrived in their dusty SUV, I met them at the driveway with open arms. Derek seemed polite enough at first. He shook my hand and thanked me for the help. Tiffany hugged me and cried a little. She told me I was a lifesaver. She told me she did not know what they would have done without me. For the first few months, it was wonderful. We ate together. We talked about old times. I felt a sense of purpose that I had not felt since Bill died. I was happy to help them save money. I was happy to contribute to their future. I did not ask them for a single cent of rent. I paid for the groceries. I paid for the utilities. I even handled the property taxes. I told them to put every penny they earned into their savings account. I wanted them to be successful. But looking back, I see the small signs I missed. I see the way Derek looked at the expensive crown molding in the living room. I see the way Tiffany started to complain about the old-fashioned wallpaper in the guest wing. They were not just guests. They were scouts. They were measuring the walls. They were evaluating my life's work. I was blinded by my own kindness. I thought I was being a good mother. I thought I was being a Christian woman by opening my doors to my family. I did not realize that I was inviting a storm into my sanctuary. I did not realize that my daughter was no longer the little girl who loved my homemade apple pie. She was a woman who saw her mother's home as an obstacle to her own vanity. Kindness is a beautiful thing, but when it is given to people who do not value it, it becomes a weapon. I gave them my home. I gave them my peace. And in return, they began to plan my exit. It started so slowly. It was a misplaced word here. A cold look there. The honeymoon phase was ending, and the nightmare was just beginning. 2 years. That is how long it took for the masks to slip. By the time we reached the 2-year mark, the atmosphere in my home had changed completely. It was no longer the warm, welcoming place I had worked 30 years to build. It felt cold. It felt tense. It felt like I was a stranger in my own kitchen. Tiffany had changed. She was not Hus Chen. She was no longer Ten Hes Chen. She was no longer looking at real estate listings. Instead, she had become obsessed with her phone. She was always filming herself. She called herself a social media influencer. She spent hours in front of a ring light, talking to people on the internet as if they were her best friends. She talked about aesthetic, branding, and content. To Tiffany, my house was no longer a home. It was a set. She began to criticize everything. She told me that the antique furniture Bill and I had picked out together was cluttered. She said the lace curtains were distracting for her videos. She started moving my things without asking. I would come home from a long day of volunteering at the clinic, and my favorite armchair would be pushed into a dark corner because it ruined the shot. Derek was not much better. He had stopped looking for a better job. He spent his days helping Tiffany with her career. He acted as her cameraman. He acted as her manager. They lived entirely on my dime. They ate my food. They used my electricity to power their expensive studio lights. And yet, they looked at me as if I were a nuisance. I remember one afternoon, I was making a pot of tea. It was a quiet ritual I had enjoyed for decades. Tiffany came into the kitchen looking frustrated. She did not say hello. She did not ask how my day was. She simply sighed and said, "Mom, Could you maybe stay in your room for the next few hours? I am filming a luxury haul video, and the sound of the kettle is going to ruin my audio. I was stunned. I looked at her, standing there in my kitchen, telling me to hide in my own bedroom. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I said, "Tiffany, this is my home. I should be able to make tea in my own kitchen." She rolled her eyes. She looked at Derek, who was standing in the doorway, and she let out a huff of annoyance. She told me I was being difficult. She told me I did not understand how hard she was working. She said that her career was on the verge of going viral, and that I was holding her back. That was the first real crack. It was the moment I realized that my daughter did not see me as a mother. She saw me as an inconvenience. She saw me as a background character in the story of her life. The disrespect grew like a weed. They stopped cleaning up after themselves. They left their expensive clothes and camera equipment all over the living room. If I asked them to tidy up, they would get angry. They told me I was controlling. They told me I was living in the past. I started to feel small. I started to feel like I was shrinking. I would sit on my porch and wonder where I had gone wrong. I had given them everything. I had given them a place to live. I had given them my support. And yet, they treated me like an intruder. Tiffany began to talk more and more about space. She would look at my master bedroom, the largest room in the house, with a look of pure envy. She would complain about how her studio was too cramped. She would drop hints about how much better her brand would look if she had a proper walk-in closet. I did not listen. I thought it was just talk. I thought that surely my own daughter would never try to take my room from me. I thought she still remembered that I was the one who paid the bills. I was the one who owned the deed. But the cracks were spreading. The foundation of our relationship was crumbling. And while I was worried about her attitude, she and Derek were already looking for a way to take the house for themselves. They were waiting for me to get weak. They were waiting for an opportunity. And sadly, they did not have to wait very long. It was a Tuesday evening. The sun was beginning to set over the oak trees in the backyard. I had spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen. I wanted to make something special. I thought, perhaps, a good home-cooked meal would bridge the gap that had been growing between us. I prepared a pot roast. It was the same recipe I had used for 30 years. The same one my husband, Bill, used to brag about to all our neighbors. The house smelled of rosemary and slow-cooked beef. It was the smell of comfort. It was the smell of a home. But when Tiffany and Derek sat down at the table, the atmosphere was anything but comfortable. Tiffany did not even look at the plate I set before her. She was staring at her phone. Her thumb was swiping up, up, up. She was checking her likes. She was checking her comments. She was living in a world of strangers while her own mother sat 3 feet away from her. Derek was just as bad. He was staring at his own screen, probably checking their bank account or some digital marketing statistics. I took a breath. I tried to start a conversation. I said, "Tiffany, honey, the roses are blooming beautifully this year. Your father would have loved to see them." She did not even look up. She just gave a short, annoyed grunt. She said, "That is nice, Mum. But listen, we actually need to talk about something important. Something about the future of my brand." I felt a small knot of worry in my stomach. I put my fork down. I asked, "Your brand? What does that have to do with dinner?" Tiffany finally put her phone face down on the table. She looked at me, but it was not the look of a daughter. It was the look of a business executive. A cold, calculating look. She said. "Mom, I'm at a crossroads. My influencer career is exploding. I have a major brand deal coming up with a luxury clothing line. But I have a problem. My current filming space is a joke. It is cramped. The lighting is terrible. It looks cheap. And in this business, if you look cheap, you are dead." I nodded slowly. I said, "I am sorry to hear that, honey. But I am sure you can find a way to make it work. You are very creative. She leaned forward. Her eyes were sharp. She said, "I have already found the solution. I need a luxury walk-in closet. I need a professional filming studio with custom shelving and high-end mirrors. And there is only one room in this house that is big enough to handle it." I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew exactly which room she was talking about. I said, "Tiffany, you cannot mean my bedroom." She did not blink. She said, "It is the only way, Mom. You have that massive master suite all to yourself. You have the natural light from the south window. You have the space for the racks and the vanity. It is a career move. It is an investment in our future. Besides, at your age, you would be much more comfortable in a smaller apartment anyway. Something easier to maintain. Something with fewer stairs." I was speechless. I looked at her. This woman I had carried for 9 months. This woman I had worked double shifts as a nurse to support. She was asking me to give up my sanctuary. She was asking me to leave the room I had shared with my husband for decades, so she could film herself trying on clothes. I found my voice. It was shaking. I said, "Tiffany, I own this house. I invited you and Derek in here to help you save money. I did not invite you here to take over my life. This is my home. This is where I belong." Derek finally spoke up. He did not look sympathetic. He looked bored. He said, "Margaret, let us be realistic. You are 65 years old. You do not need all this space. You are just rattling around in here like a ghost. Tiffany is a rising star. She needs this. You are being selfish." Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had given them everything. I had paid for their food. I had given them a roof. And now, because I wanted to sleep in my own bed, I was selfish. Tiffany reached out and patted my hand. But it was not a gesture of love. It was patronizing. She said, "Do not worry, Mom. We will help you find a nice little studio across town. We will even help you move your boxes, but we need you out by next Monday. We have the contractors coming in to start the demolition on Tuesday morning." I pulled my hand away. My heart was pounding in my ears. I said, "No, I am not going anywhere. You cannot do this. You have no right." Tiffany and Derek shared a look. A dark, knowing look. Derek smiled. It was the kind of smile that made my skin crawl. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Actually, Margaret, we have every right." I did not understand. I thought it was just a threat. I thought they were trying to scare me. I did not realize that the trap had already been set. I did not realize that while I was cooking pot roast, they were preparing to throw me out into the street. The silence in the dining room was deafening. I looked from Tiffany to Derek. My mind was racing. I was trying to make sense of what Derek had just said. We have every right. How could they have the right? I had worked for 30 years as a registered nurse. I had paid off the $500,000 mortgage myself. My name was on the deed. It had always been on the deed. I said, "Derek, stop this nonsense. This is my house. I have the papers in the safe in the hallway." Derek laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. He looked at Tiffany and said, "Should I tell her, or do you want to?" Tiffany sighed. She looked like she was bored with the whole conversation. She said, "Just tell her, Derek. I have a live stream in 20 minutes. Derek leaned over the table. He looked me right in the eyes. He said, "Margaret, do you remember last year? Do you remember when you had your hip surgery?" I felt a chill go down my spine. Of course, I remembered. It was the hardest time of my life. I had been in so much pain. The surgery was complicated. I spent weeks in the hospital. When I finally came home, I was on heavy medication. I was groggy. I was weak. I could barely keep my eyes open for more than an hour at a time. Derek continued. he said. You were sitting in that recliner in the living room. You were so tired. You said you were worried about the medical bills. You were worried about the insurance claims. I nodded slowly. I remembered that. I remember Tiffany coming to me with a stack of papers. She told me she was taking care of everything. She told me she just needed my signature so she could talk to the insurance company on my behalf. She told me she was protecting me. Derek's smile grew wider. He said, You thought those papers were for the hospital. You thought they were for the insurance. But they weren't. One of those documents was a gift deed. It was a legal transfer of the property. I felt like the floor was falling away from underneath me. I whispered, What are you saying? Derek leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. He said, I am saying that you signed the house over to Tiffany as a gift. It was all handled perfectly. A notary came to the house while you were, let us say, under the influence of your pain medication. You signed. The notary stamped it. We filed it with the county the very next day. I looked at Tiffany. My voice was a broken sob. I said, Tiffany, is this true? Did you steal my house while I was sick? Tiffany did not look ashamed. She did not even look sad. She looked at her fingernails. She said, It was for your own good, Mom. You were getting older. We needed to make sure the assets were protected. And since the house is in my name now, I am the one who makes the decisions. And I decided that I need that closet. I could not breathe. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I had trusted her. I had given her my hand to hold when I was in pain. And she had used that hand to rob me of everything I owned. My 30 years of nursing, my 30 years of double shifts, my husband's legacy. All of it. Gone. With the stroke of a pen, Derek stood up. He walked around the table and stood behind me. He put his hands on my shoulders. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I was frozen. He said, We have already started the process of changing the locks, Margaret. We have the legal documents. If you try to fight this, it will just cost you what little money you have left in your savings. You gave this house to your daughter. It was a gift, and you cannot take back a gift. I looked up at him. I said, I was drugged. I did not know what I was signing. No judge will uphold this. Derek chuckled. He said, Good luck proving that. The notary saw you sign. You looked perfectly fine to her. You were smiling. You were happy to help your daughter. It is your word against a legal document and a witness. Tiffany stood up too. She picked up her phone. She said, We are being generous, Mom. We are giving you a full week to pack. Most people would have called the sheriff tonight. But we are family. We want you to be settled in your new little studio before the construction starts. A week. I had 1 week to pack up 30 years of memories. 1 week to leave the home I had built with Bill. I looked at the pot roast on the table. It was cold now. The fat was beginning to congeal on the surface of the gravy. It looked disgusting. It looked like my life. I realized then that I had raised a monster. I had taught my daughter to be strong. I had taught her to be independent. But I had forgotten to teach her to be human. I had forgotten to teach her about respect. I got up from the table. My legs felt like lead. I did not say another word. I walked out of the dining room. I walked past the photos of Tiffany as a baby. I walked past the photo of Bill and me on our wedding day. I went into my bedroom, the room that was about to become a closet, and I locked the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I cried. I cried for the betrayal. I cried for my lost home. But mostly, I cried for the daughter I thought I had. She was gone, and in her place was a stranger who had stolen my world. But as I sat there, in the dark, my mind began to clear. I was a nurse. I had seen people at their worst. I had seen people try to cheat death. And I knew one thing for certain. Every action has a consequence. Tiffany and Derek thought they were geniuses. They thought they had covered every base. But they had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten about Bill. They had forgotten about the way he thought. They had forgotten that my husband was the most cautious man I had ever known. I wiped my eyes. I reached under the bed and pulled out a small metal box. A box Tiffany did not know about. A box that contained the true map of this property. The battle was not over. They had the house. But they did not have the land. And in the state of Virginia. That made all the difference in the world. The moving truck was small. It was much smaller than the one Bill and I had used when we first moved into our beautiful $500,000 home 30 years ago. I only needed a small truck because I was only allowed to take what could fit into a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the other side of town. I remember standing on the sidewalk. My knees were aching from the damp morning air. I watched Derek and Tiffany stand on the porch of my house. My house. They did not help me lift a single box. They just stood there, like royalty watching a peasant leave the kingdom. Tiffany had her phone out. She was probably filming my departure for her followers. She probably called it a new chapter, or cleansing the energy of the home. The drive across town felt like a funeral procession. I drove my old sedan slowly. I watched the familiar oak trees and the well-kept lawns of my neighborhood disappear in the rear-view mirror. I was heading toward the industrial district, a place of grey concrete and loud sirens. The studio apartment was on the third floor of a building that had not seen a coat of paint since the 1980s. The hallway smelled of stale cabbage and old cigarette smoke. When I turned the key and walked inside, I wanted to fall to my knees and cry. It was one single room. The linoleum floor was cracked and peeling at the corners. The window looked out over a brick wall and a dumpster. There was a tiny kitchenette with a stove that only had 2 working burners. The bathroom was so small, I could barely turn around in it. I sat down on a cardboard box. I was 65 years old. I had been a registered nurse for 3 decades. I had saved lives. I had comforted the dying. I had paid off a $500,000 home. And here I was, sitting in a place that felt like a prison cell. The first night was the hardest. I did not have a bed yet. I had to sleep on a thin mattress on the floor. Every time a car drove by outside, the headlights would flash across the ceiling. I could hear the neighbors through the thin walls. I could hear a television blaring. I could hear a couple arguing. I felt a deep, heavy coldness in my chest. It was not just sadness. It was betrayal. I kept thinking about Tiffany. I remembered the night she had a high fever when she was 6 years old. I stayed up with her all night. I wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. I prayed to God to let her be okay. I would have given my life for her. And now, she had taken my life anyway. She had taken my home. She had taken my dignity. I thought about the luxury walk-in closet she was building. I thought about the expensive mirrors and the velvet racks. While she was playing dress-up in my master bedroom, I was eating a can of soup over a sink that wouldn't drain properly. I felt like a failure. As a mother, you always ask yourself, where did I go wrong? Did I give her too much? Did I not discipline her enough? I had tried to teach her the value of $1. I had tried to teach her about the American dream. But somewhere along the line, she decided that the dream was something you steal, not something you earn. Days turned into a week. I spent my time unpacking slowly. I put my nursing certificates in cheap frames and hung them on the cracked walls. They were a reminder of who I was. I was Margaret. I was a professional. I was a woman of substance. This room did not define me, but the loneliness was like a shadow. I had no garden to tend. I had no porch to sit on. I had no neighbors to chat with over the fence. I was invisible. I was just another old woman in a rundown apartment. I remember looking at my hands. They were wrinkled now. They were the hands of a woman who had worked hard. And as I looked at them, I felt a spark of something. It was not anger. It was resolved. I told myself, Margaret, you are a nurse. You are trained to handle emergencies. You are trained to look for symptoms. You are trained to find the cure. I realized that I was in a state of shock. But shock eventually wears off. And when it does, you start to look at the facts. You start to look at the charts. You start to look for the one thing the enemy missed. I was down. I was out. I was living in a dump, but I was still alive. And I still had my mind. I began to realize that Tiffany and Derek had made a very big assumption. They assumed that because I was old, I was stupid. They assumed that because they had the house, they had the victory. But they did not know about Bill's metal box. They did not know about the man I had married. And they did not know that a registered nurse never, ever gives up on a patient, even when that patient is in her own life. The second week in the studio apartment was when the weather turned cold. The wind whistled through the gaps in the window frame. I had to wear my heavy nursing cardigan just to stay warm while I sat at the small folding table I had bought at a garage sale. I was going through the last of my boxes. Most of them were filled with old clothes and kitchen supplies. But there was one box. A heavy, black, metal box. It was the one I had pulled from under my bed the night I was evicted. Bill had bought this box 30 years ago. He was a man who believed in paper. He did not trust computers. He did not trust the cloud. He wanted to be able to touch his documents. He wanted to know exactly where his boundaries were. I opened the lid. The smell of old paper and cedar filled the tiny room. It was the smell of my husband. It was the smell of safety. I began to spread the papers out on the table. There were old tax returns. There were the original mortgage documents from when we bought the house for $120,000 in the early 90s. There were the receipts for the new roof we installed 10 years ago. And then I found it. It was a large, yellowed map of the property. I remember the day we bought the extra land. It was 15 years ago. The lot next to our house had gone up for sale. It was a beautiful piece of land, full of wildflowers and old pine trees. Bill wanted it. He said, "Margaret, if we own the land next door, no one can ever build a house too close to us. We will have our privacy forever." We bought the lot. But Bill was clever. He was a surveyor by trade before he went into construction. He knew the law. He had the property subdivided in a very specific way. I traced my finger over the lines on the map. I felt my heart begin to beat faster. The house sat on a very small plot, a tiny square of land. When I signed that gift deed while I was groggy from surgery, I had only signed over the plot the house was on. Tiffany and Derek had been so greedy, so rushed, so focused on the building, that they never checked the land survey. I looked closer. I looked at the legal description of the adjacent lot. The lot that I still owned. The lot that was not part of the gift. My eyes widened. Bill had been even more cautious than I remembered. The private driveway. The only way to get a car from the street to the garage was entirely on the second lot. It was my land. And then I saw the most important detail of all. The X marked the septic system. In our part of the county, we were not on the city sewer line. We had a private septic tank and a leach field. According to the map, the entire septic system was located on the adjacent lot. My lot. I sat back in my chair. I let out a long, shaky breath. I realized what this meant. I was a nurse. I knew about systems. If the heart stops, the body dies. If the lungs stop, the body dies. And if the waste cannot leave the house becomes a poison. Without access to the septic system, that $500,000 house was nothing more than a pile of bricks and wood. It would be legally uninhabitable. No one could live there. No one could use the bathroom. No one could run the dishwasher. And without the driveway, they could not even park their cars. They could not get deliveries for their fancy influencer equipment. They were essentially stranded on a tiny island that they had stolen from me. I felt a surge of energy. It was the first time I had felt powerful in months. I remembered Derek's cold smile. I remembered him saying, "You cannot take back a gift." I whispered to the empty room, "You are right, Derek. I cannot take back the house. But I never gave you the land." I spent the rest of the night studying the local zoning laws. I looked up the rules for easements. I knew that in the state of Virginia, if a person has been using a driveway for years, they might have a claim to keep using it. But this was different. This was a private property dispute involving a fraudulent transfer of a deed. I was not going to play nice anymore. I had been the sweet mother for too long. I had been the kind nurse for too long. I reached for my phone. I did not call Tiffany. I did not call Derek. I called a contractor I had known for 20 years. A man who had worked with Bill. A man who knew the meaning of the word loyalty. I told him, "Joe, I have a job for you. It is a big job. I need a heavy iron fence. A permanent one. And I need someone who knows how to cap a main sewer line." Joe was quiet for a moment. He knew about my situation. Everyone in our small town knew. He said, "Margaret, are you sure about this? It is going to cause a lot of trouble." I looked at the photo of Bill on the table. He was smiling. He looked proud. I said, "Joe, the trouble started when my daughter threw me out of my own home so she could build a closet. I am just reclaiming what is mine." I hung up the phone, and I felt a sense of peace. I was not a victim anymore. I was a woman with a plan. Tiffany wanted a luxury lifestyle. Well, she was about to find out that a luxury lifestyle is very hard to maintain when you cannot flush the toilet. I went to bed that night on my thin mattress on the floor. But for the first time, I did not feel the cold. I did not hear the noisy neighbors. I slept like a baby, because I knew that tomorrow, the influencer was going to have a very, very bad day. Patience is something you learn very quickly when you are a registered nurse. You learn to wait for the fever to break. You learn to wait for the lab results to come back from the hospital pharmacy. You learn that timing is often more important than the treatment itself. In my 30 years of nursing, I had seen many people rush into things and make mistakes. I was not going to be one of those people. In my tiny, grey, studio apartment, I began my period of observation. I did not call a lawyer immediately. I did not scream at Tiffany through the phone. I did not go to the house and cause a scene on the front lawn. Instead, I did something that Tiffany and Derek never expected. I became a ghost. I spent my days sitting at my small folding table with my tablet. I had created a fake social media account just so I could follow Tiffany's updates. It was painful to watch, but it was necessary. I needed to see exactly what they were doing to my home. Every day, Tiffany posted videos. She called it her home transformation series. She showed the contractors tearing out the built-in bookshelves that Bill had made for me by hand. She showed them ripping up the plush cream-colored carpet I had picked out for our 25th anniversary. She laughed as she tossed my old nursing books into a dumpster in the driveway. "Out with the old. In with the gold," she told her followers. She was smiling. She looked so happy. She looked like she had just won the lottery. I watched as she began to spend money. She spent a lot of money. She hired a high-end interior designer from the city. She ordered custom-made velvet clothing racks from a boutique in New York. She bought a crystal chandelier that cost more than my first car. She installed a 3-way mirror system with professional-grade studio lighting. I estimated that she and Derek were spending at least $50,000 on this luxury walk-in closet. I knew they did not have that kind of money saved up. They were using credit cards. They were gambling on the idea that this new studio would bring in massive brand deals and make them rich. Derek was just as involved. He was constantly posting about the logistics of the renovation. He talked about how they were optimizing the floor plan. He bragged about how he had successfully managed the transition of the previous owner. He did not call me his mother-in-law. He called me the previous owner. It was a cold, calculated insult. But as I watched them spend their last dime, I felt a strange sense of calm. Every dollar they spent on that house was a dollar they were throwing into a bottomless pit. They were building a palace on a foundation of sand. They were so focused on the wallpaper and the lighting that they never once stopped to look at the property lines. They never once checked the county records for the septic system. I spent my evenings talking to Joe, the contractor who had been friends with Bill. We met at a quiet diner on the edge of town. I showed him the maps. I showed him the deeds. Joe shook his head as he looked at the drawings. He whispered, "Margaret, they really have no idea, do they? The entire leach field for the septic tank is right under the spot where you want to put the garden fence. If you cap that line, that house will be backed up in less than 24 hours. I nodded. I said, "I know, Joe, and the driveway is entirely on my lot. They have been parking their trucks on my land for weeks." Joe looked at me with a mix of respect and fear. He said, "You are a cold one, Margaret. Bill always said you were the smartest person in the room." I said, "I am not being cold, Joe. I am being fair. They stole my home. They used my weakness against me. I am simply using the law to protect what I still own." I told Joe to wait. I told him I would give him the signal when the time was right. I wanted Tiffany to finish the renovation. I wanted her to hang every single one of her expensive designer dresses. I wanted the paint to be dry and the lights to be shining. I wanted her to be at the very top of her mountain before I started to take it apart. It was a strategic silence. I was triaging the situation. I was waiting for the perfect moment to perform the surgery. Sometimes, late at night, I would feel a pang of guilt. I would think about the little girl who used to play with dolls on that bedroom floor. But then, I would remember the way she looked at me over the pot roast. I would remember the way she told me I would be more comfortable in a rundown studio. The guilt would vanish. It would be replaced by a cold, hard determination. Tiffany wanted a lifestyle move. Well, I was preparing a move of my own, and it was going to be the most expensive lesson she ever learned. The day finally arrived. I saw the announcement on Tiffany's social media page 3 days in advance. It was a professional-looking graphic with gold lettering. It said, "The reveal. Join me for a live stream event. The future of luxury is here." She had invited other influencers from all over the state. She had a contract with a luxury handbag company to showcase their new line during the stream. She had spent thousands on champagne, catering, and a professional film crew. This was her big break. This was the moment she thought she would finally become a star. I woke up early that morning in my studio apartment. I felt like a soldier preparing for a mission. I put on my best nursing cardigan. I made a thermos of strong black coffee. And then, I called Joe. I said, "Today is the day, Joe. Are your boys ready?" Joe chuckled on the other end of the line. He said, "We are already on our way, Margaret. We have the iron fence panels on the flatbed, and I have the heavy-duty capping equipment for the septic line. We will be there by 10 o'clock. I drove to the house. Or, rather, I drove to the edge of my property. I parked my old sedan behind a thick row of bushes where I could see everything without being seen. At exactly 10 o'clock, Joe's crew arrived. They worked with the precision of a surgical team. They began to unload the heavy iron fence sections. They started at the very edge of the road, right where the driveway began. They were not on the house plot. They were on my land. By noon, a beautiful, unyielding, black iron fence was standing across the entire entrance of the driveway. It had a heavy gate with a thick chain and a padlock. While the fence was going up, Joe himself was in the backyard. He had the map Bill had drawn. He found the main clean-out pipe for the septic system. It was located about 10 feet away from the house, safely on my side of the property line. He used a heavy-duty, industrial cap. He welded it shut. He buried it under a few inches of fresh soil, so it was completely hidden. I watched from my car. I could see the activity inside the house through the large master bedroom window. Tiffany was running around in a silk robe. She was barking orders at the film crew. She was holding a glass of champagne. She looked stressed, but she looked triumphant. She had no idea that her driveway was now a dead end. She had no idea that her plumbing was now a ticking time bomb. At 2 o'clock, the guests started to arrive. I watched as a shiny black SUV tried to turn into the driveway. The driver stopped. He looked confused. He got out of the car and stared at the iron fence. He tried to push the gate, but it would not budge. There was a sign on the fence that Joe had printed for me. It said, "Private property. No trespassing. All vehicles will be towed. Soon." There was a line of cars backing up onto the main road. I could hear the honking. I could see the guests in their fancy outfits walking up the grassy hill because they couldn't drive to the house. They looked annoyed. Their high heels were sinking into the mud. Then, the front door flew open. Tiffany came running out. She was wearing a sparkling gold dress. Her hair was perfectly styled, but her face was red with anger. She ran down to the fence. She started shaking the bars. She was screaming at the guests. She was screaming at the air. I stayed in my car. I pulled out my phone and tuned into her live stream. The camera was already rolling. The film crew inside the house was capturing everything. The comments were flying by on the screen. Why is there a fence? Is this part of the reveal? The house looks beautiful, but why is everyone walking through the mud? Tiffany tried to keep her cool for the camera. She forced a smile. She told her followers, "Oh, we just have a little security issue today. Nothing to worry about. Let us go inside and see the closet." The guests filed into the house. Tiffany led them up to the master suite. The camera followed her. The room looked incredible. The velvet racks were filled with designer clothes. The crystal chandelier was sparkling. The mirrors were reflecting the light perfectly. It was a masterpiece of vanity. Tiffany stood in the center of the room. She held up a luxury handbag. She began her pitch. She was talking about elevating your space and living your best life. But then, it happened. I saw a guest in the background of the video. A woman in a blue dress. She went into the master bathroom and closed the door. A few seconds later, I heard a sound through the phone. A muffled, gurgling sound. The woman came out of the bathroom looking pale. She whispered something to another guest. Then, another guest tried to use the guest bathroom downstairs. Within 10 minutes, the luxury house began to smell. It was a faint smell at first. The smell of rotten eggs and stagnant water. Tiffany tried to ignore it. She kept talking. She kept smiling. But the guests were starting to cover their noses with their silk napkins. Then, the gurgling got louder. I could hear it coming through the speakers of my phone. It was the sound of 30 years of plumbing meeting a dead end. Suddenly, a dark, foul liquid began to bubble up from the drain in the center of the master bathroom floor. It spilled out onto the brand new, custom, white marble tile. The guests screamed. The film crew dropped their cameras. Tiffany froze. She looked at the bathroom door. She looked at her white marble. She looked at the $50,000 she had spent on a room that was now being flooded with sewage. The live stream was still going. Thousands of people were watching as the influencer of the year stood in the middle of her luxury reveal while the house literally began to reject her presence. The comments were brutal. "Is that poop? The house smells through the screen. Luxury closet. More like a luxury sewer." Tiffany let out a scream of pure, raw rage. She grabbed her phone and ran to the window. She looked out at the street. She saw my old sedan parked behind the bushes. She knew. In that moment, she knew exactly what I had done. She dialed my number. My phone vibrated in my hand. I waited for 4 rings. Then, I answered. I did not say hello. I just waited. "Mom!" she screamed. "What did you do? What did you do to my house? The bathrooms are overflowing. The guests are leaving. There is a fence across the driveway. I have a brand deal on the line. You are ruining my life." I looked at the beautiful, strong, iron fence Joe had built. I looked at the sunset over the trees. I said, "I am not ruining your life, Tiffany. I am just reclaiming my land. You told me I would be more comfortable in a studio. Well, I think you will find that a house without a septic system is quite uncomfortable. It is just a lifestyle move, honey. I am sure you can optimize your way out of this. I hung up the phone. I put the car in gear, and I drove away. Behind me, I could hear the sirens. The guests were fleeing. The reveal was over. Tiffany wanted a front row seat to luxury, but all she got was a front row seat to the consequences of her own greed. There is a specific kind of silence that comes right before a storm. As a registered nurse for 30 years, I had felt that silence many times in the hospital. It is the moment before a monitor begins to alarm. It is the moment before a patient takes a turn for the worse. You can feel it in the air. It is heavy. It is thick. It is the silence of things about to change forever. On the day of Tiffany's big reveal, I sat in my old sedan at the top of the hill, and I felt that silence. I looked at my watch. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. Below me, the $500,000 home I had built with Bill looked like a postcard. It was gleaming under the Virginia sun. I saw the white vans of the catering crew. I saw the expensive cars of the other influencers pulling into the neighborhood. They were all there to see the luxury transformation. They were all there to celebrate a thief. I took a sip of my black coffee from my thermos. It was bitter. It was hot. It felt like my resolve. I picked up my phone and dialed Joe. I said, "Joe, it is time." Joe did not hesitate. He said, "We are moving in now, Margaret." I watched as two large flatbed trucks turned the corner. They did not pull up to the house. They stopped right at the edge of the property line. My property line. Joe and his 3 sons hopped out. They did not look like contractors. They looked like an army of justice. They began to unload the iron fence panels. These were not cheap, flimsy garden fences. These were heavy-duty, 6-foot-tall, wrought iron barriers. Each panel was a statement. Each panel was a boundary. The sound of the post-hole digger began to echo through the quiet neighborhood. Thump, thump, thump. It was a rhythmic sound. It was a powerful sound. To the neighbors, it probably sounded like construction. To me, it sounded like the heartbeat of my dignity returning. They worked with incredible speed. They had pre-dug the holes the day before. Very quietly, while Tiffany was at a spa getting her hair done for the live stream. Now, they were just setting the posts in fast-drying concrete. By noon, the iron fence was complete. It ran across the entire length of the driveway entrance. It cut the house off from the street like a moat around a castle. Joe wrapped a thick, heavy, steel chain around the gate. He snapped a massive padlock shut. The first guest arrived 10 minutes later. It was a young woman in a bright yellow convertible. She tried to turn into the driveway, and she slammed on her brakes. She stared at the iron bars. She honked her horn. She looked confused. I watched her through my binoculars. I saw her get out of her car. She walked up to the fence. She read the sign Joe had hung there. It was a large, white sign with bold red letters. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. She looked at the house. She looked at the fence. She looked at her high heels. Then, she started to walk through the damp grass and mud to get to the front door. While the fence was going up, Joe's youngest son, Sam, was in the backyard. He was standing exactly where Bill's old map said the septic main line was. He had a shovel. He had a heavy iron cap. He dug down 3 feet. He found the white plastic pipe. This was the throat of the house. This was where everything the house did not want went to die. Sam took a heavy duty. Industrial. Sealant. He placed the cap over the pipe. He bolted it down. He welded the bolts. He looked up at my car and gave me a thumbs up. It was done. The house was now an island. It was a beautiful, expensive, gilded cage. It could breathe in, but it could no longer breathe out. I sat there and waited. I knew how the biology of a house worked. A house with 5 people inside, drinking champagne, using the fancy new marble bathrooms. It would only take an hour. Maybe less. I turned on my tablet. I opened Tiffany's live stream. There she was. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly social security check. She was holding a glass of bubbly. She was laughing. She was telling thousands of people about how she had curated this space. She was showing off the velvet racks. She was showing off the crystal chandelier. She said, "I wanted a space that reflected my true self. A space of luxury. A space of purity," I whispered to the screen. "Well, you are about to see your true self, Tiffany. And it is not going to be pure." Suddenly, I saw a guest in the background of the video. He was a man in a tailored suit. He walked toward the master bathroom. He opened the door. A few seconds later, he came out. He looked down at his shoes. He looked at the floor. He looked confused. Then, I heard it. Even through the tiny speakers of my tablet, I heard the gurgle. It was a deep, wet sound. It was the sound of a house that was full. It was the sound of a system that had reached its limit. Tiffany noticed it too. She paused in the middle of a sentence about her aesthetic. She tilted her head. She looked toward the bathroom. Then, the smell hit. I could see the moment the scent reached her. Her nose wrinkled. Her smile faltered. She tried to keep talking, but the smell was aggressive. It was the smell of 30 years of waste with nowhere to go. It was the smell of reality crashing into her fantasy. Another guest, a woman in a blue silk dress, ran out of the guest bathroom downstairs. She was holding her nose. She was pointing at the floor. The gurgling got louder. It became a roar. I watched as a dark, thick liquid began to seep out from under the master bathroom door. It flowed onto the white marble. It flowed toward the velvet clothing racks. It flowed toward the designer handbags. The luxury reveal turned into a scene from a horror movie. People were screaming. They were lifting their dresses. They were jumping onto the furniture. Tiffany stood in the center of the room. She was frozen. She looked at her white marble. She looked at the sewage that was now soaking into her custom rugs. The live stream was still running. The comments were a blur of laughter and disgust. "Is this the new scent for her brand?" someone wrote. "Luxury has never smelled so bad," wrote another. Tiffany looked at the camera. She looked at the guests who were now pushing past her to get to the door. She looked out the window and saw the iron fence. She saw the cars trapped on the street. She realized she was in a trap. A trap made of iron and water. I turned off the tablet. I did not need to see any more. I put my car in gear and slowly drove down the hill. I drove past the fence. I drove past the confused guests. I drove past my daughter's screaming face as she stood on the porch. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was not joy. It was peace. It was the feeling of a nurse who had finally finished a long, difficult shift. I had given her a gift. I had given her exactly what she wanted. She wanted the house. She wanted the room. She wanted the lifestyle. And now, she had them. She had them all to herself. In the dark. In the cold. In the smell of her own greed. My phone began to ring before I had even reached the main road. I did not need to look at the caller identification to know who it was. The vibration felt angry. It felt desperate. I pulled my car over into a quiet church parking lot. I wanted to be still when I spoke. I wanted to be calm. I answered on the 4th ring. "Mom!" Tiffany's voice was a jagged blade. She was not just crying. She was screaming. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. "Mom! What did you do? What did you do? The house is ruined. Everything is ruined. The bathrooms they are overflowing. There is water everywhere. The smell. Oh God. The smell is everywhere. And Derek tried to drive his car out, and there is a fence. A giant iron fence. He tried to cut the chain, but it is too thick. Mom, answer me. I sat back in my seat. I looked at the stained glass windows of the church. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was the nurse again. I was the one delivering the difficult news to the family. I said, "Hello, Tiffany. You sound stressed. Is the live stream not going well?" There was a gasp on the other end. Stressed? I am beyond stressed. I have 5,000 people watching me on the internet. I have brand representatives from New York in my living room. And my house is full of filth. Did you do this? Did you hire those men to put up that fence? I kept my voice low. I kept it steady. I said, "Tiffany, let us be realistic. I did not do anything to your house. You told me the house was yours. You told me you had the deed. You told me it was a gift. Then why can't I use the toilet?" she shrieked. "Why is there a fence on my driveway?" "Ah," I said. "That is the thing about gifts, honey. You have to read the fine print. You see, you took the house, but you never took the land. My late husband, your father, was very careful. The driveway and the septic system are on my property. And since I no longer live there, I decided to use my land for a private project. I decided to build a fence for my own privacy. And as for the septic line, well, it was a bit of an eyesore on my lot. So I had it capped." There was a long silence. I could hear her heavy, ragged, breathing. Then Derek's voice came into the background. He was shouting, "Tell her we will sue. Tell her this is illegal. We have an easement. She cannot just cut off the sewer." I smiled. A small, sad smile. I said, "Derek, I can hear you. And before you start talking about lawsuits, you might want to call the county health department." I already did. I informed them that the property at your address no longer has a functioning waste disposal system. In this county, that makes a residence legally uninhabitable. They are sending an inspector out this afternoon to red tag the front door. I heard a thud. It sounded like Tiffany had dropped her phone. I heard her sobbing. "Mom, please," she whispered. She sounded like a little girl again. But the time for being a little girl was over. "Please. We spent all our money on the renovation. We have no savings left. We put everything on the credit cards. If we can't live here, if the bank finds out, we will lose everything." I felt a small prick of pain in my heart. But then I remembered the studio apartment. I remembered the smell of stale cabbage. I remembered the thin mattress on the floor. I remembered her telling me that I would be more comfortable in a dump. I said, "Tiffany, listen to me very carefully. You told me that turning my bedroom into a closet was a career move. You told me that me moving out was a lifestyle move. Well, this is a personal growth move for me. I am focusing on my boundaries. I am focusing on my own assets." "But we have nowhere to go," she cried. "I am sure you can optimize your way out of this," I said. I used her own words. I let them hang in the air like a heavy weight. "Perhaps you can turn that luxury closet into a sleeping area. You won't have a bathroom, and you won't be able to drive your car out. But I am sure it will look wonderful in your videos." "You are a monster," she screamed. "How can a mother do this to her own child?" I did not get angry. I did not raise my voice. I simply said, "A mother protects her home, Tiffany. A mother teaches her children that respect is the foundation of everything. You destroyed that foundation. You stole the roof from over my head while I was recovering from surgery. You used my own daughter's hand to rob me. So, do not talk to me about what a mother should do." I hung up. I sat in the silence of the church parking lot for a long time. I knew what would happen next. I had seen this play out in the hospital when families fought over inheritances. The county inspector would arrive. He would see the sewage. He would see the lack of access. He would place a big orange sticker on the front door. He would tell them they had 24 hours to vacate the premises for health reasons. The bank would find out. When a house is declared uninhabitable, it is a violation of the mortgage terms. The insurance company would cancel their policy. The credit card companies would see the drop in their credit scores as the brand deals disappeared. The illusion was over. The luxury influencer was about to become a homeless person with a lot of expensive clothes she couldn't wash. I looked at my hands. They were steady. My heart was calm. I had been a nurse for 30 years. I had seen death. I had seen birth. I had seen the worst of humanity and the best. And I knew that sometimes, to save the patient, you have to cut away the infection. Tiffany and Derek were an infection in my life. They were a sickness of greed and vanity. I had performed the surgery. It was painful. It was messy. It was expensive. But I was going to survive. I started the engine. I drove back to my tiny, cramped studio apartment. But as I walked up the stairs, I did not feel like a victim. I did not feel poor. I felt like the owner of every single blade of grass on that hill. I felt like the wife of a very smart man named Bill. I made myself a cup of tea. I sat by the window. I watched the sun go down. I knew that tomorrow, the house would be empty. The luxury closet would be dark. The crystal chandelier would hang in a house that smelled of ruin. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was truly home. In 30 years of nursing, I have seen many people try to outrun their choices. I have seen them ignore the symptoms of a failing heart. I have seen them ignore the warnings of a tired body. But eventually, the bill always comes due. For Tiffany and Derek, that bill arrived with the force of a hurricane. The aftermath of the live stream disaster was swift. The luxury handbag company did not just cancel their contract. They sued Tiffany for breach of brand reputation. They claimed her sewage incident had damaged their image. Then came the other brands. One by one, the emails arrived. Cancelled. 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 Within 1 week, their income had vanished. They tried to fight me. Derek went to a fancy law firm in the city. He told them about the gift deed. He told them I was a bitter old woman who was obstructing their right to their home. But lawyers do not work for free. When the firm looked at their credit scores and their mounting debt, they asked for a $20,000 retainer up front. Tiffany and Derek did not have $20, let alone $20,000. They had spent every cent they had on that luxury closet. They had used their savings for the crystal chandelier. They had used their credit cards for the designer clothes. They were living on a mountain of debt. And that mountain was beginning to slide. The bank was the next to call. When a property is tagged by the county as uninhabitable, it triggers a default in the mortgage agreement. The bank does not want to own a house that cannot be lived in. They demanded that the septic system be repaired immediately. But Joe and I had the legal rights to the land where the system sat. To fix it, they would have to buy the land from me. I set the price at $300,000. It was a price I knew they could never pay. They tried to stay in the house. They tried to use buckets of water and camp in the master suite. But the smell was permanent. The sewage had soaked into the subflooring. The luxury marble was ruined. Without a driveway, they had to carry their groceries up the muddy hill in the rain. The stress began to tear them apart. I know this because the neighbors told me they could hear the screaming from the street. Derek blamed Tiffany for the deed trick. Tiffany blamed Derek for not checking the land survey. One morning, a month after the eviction, I saw a post on social media. It was not a video of a closet. It was a picture of a suitcase. Derek had left. He did not want a wife who was broke. He did not want a life in a house that smelled of ruin. He took the SUV, which was in his name, and he disappeared. Tiffany was left alone in a dark, cold, $500,000 tomb. The bank finally foreclosed. They took the gifted house back because the property taxes had not been paid and the legal violations were too great. Tiffany was given 48 hours to leave. She didn't even have a car to carry her designer clothes away. She had to sell them to a local thrift shop for pennies on the dollar just to afford a moving van. I watched the news of the foreclosure from my studio apartment. I felt a deep, quiet sadness. Not for the house, but for the waste of it all. They could have had a beautiful life. They could have had a mother who loved them. But they chose greed. They chose vanity. And as any nurse will tell you, greed is a terminal condition. 1 year has passed since the day the iron fence went up. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. I did not stay in that studio apartment. With the help of a good lawyer, I negotiated a settlement with the bank. I sold the adjacent lot and the rights to the septic line to the new owners who bought the house at auction. With that money and my own savings, I bought something better. I bought a small, beautiful cottage on the edge of a quiet lake. It is not a $500,000 mansion. It is a home. It has a wrap-around porch. It has a garden full of blue hydrangeas. And most importantly, it has a room that I have turned into a library. I spent my life caring for others. Now, I spend my days reading the books I never had time for. I have a comfortable chair. I have a view of the water. I have peace. I was sitting on my porch last Tuesday, sipping a glass of iced tea, when a beat-up, rusted, old car pulled into my gravel driveway. A woman got out. At first, I did not recognize her. She was thin. Her hair was lank and dull. She was wearing a faded sweatshirt and jeans that were torn at the knees. She looked like she was 80 years old, but she was only 35. It was Tiffany. She walked up to the porch steps. She did not look at me. She looked at her shoes. Her voice was a whisper. "Mom," she said. I did not move. I did not get up. I simply said, "Hello, Tiffany." She began to cry. Not the dramatic, fake tears she used for her followers. These were real tears. The tears of someone who has finally hit the bottom. "Derek is gone," she sobbed. "The money is gone. I lost everything, Mom. My brand, my friends. Everyone left me when the house went under. I have been living in a shack behind a gas station on the interstate. It is cold. There is no heat. I am working 2 jobs at a fast food place just to buy bread." I looked at her. I saw the daughter I had raised. But I also saw the stranger who had stolen my home while I was in a hospital bed. "I am sorry to hear that," I said. And I meant it. I was sorry that her life had come to this. Tiffany looked up at me. Her eyes were full of hope. "Mom, please. You have this big, beautiful cottage. You have an extra room. Can I just come home? I will do anything. I will clean. I will cook. I just need a place to stay." I thought about my library. I thought about the room that would have been her luxury closet. I thought about the foundation of a home. I said, "Tiffany, I have turned my extra room into a library. It was a personal growth move. I needed a space for my books and my thoughts. I finally have the sanctuary I worked 30 years for." "But what about me?" she cried. "I am your daughter." I stood up. I felt tall. I felt strong. I said, "A daughter is someone who respects her mother. A daughter is someone who does not rob her own flesh and blood. You chose a closet over a mother. You chose a lifestyle over a family. And now, you have the lifestyle you earned. I think you will find that your shack is much more suited to the person you chose to become." I did not scream. I did not call her names. I simply walked to my front door. "Respect is the foundation of any home, Tiffany," I told her. "If you destroy that foundation, you do not deserve the roof above your head. I hope you find what you are looking for, but you will not find it here." I closed the door. I heard her car start up. I heard the gravel crunch as she drove away. I went into my library. I sat in my favorite chair. I picked up a book by my husband's favorite author. The house was quiet. The air was sweet. I realized then that justice is not always about winning a court case. Sometimes, justice is just about being able to sit in a room you earned, with a heart that is finally at rest. Tiffany wanted a front row seat to luxury. And in the end, she got a front row seat to the most important lesson of all. You can steal a house, but you can never steal a home. As I sat back in my favorite armchair and listened to the gentle waves of the lake hitting the shore, I realized that a home is much more than just a piece of real estate. It is much more than $500,000 of wood and stone. A home is a sacred space. It is a sanctuary built on the foundation of trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. In my 30 years of nursing, I saw many families fall apart over money. I saw children forget the sacrifices of their parents. I saw greed turn people into strangers. I always hoped it would never happen to me, but when it did, I had to learn a very hard lesson. I had to learn that being a mother does not mean being a doormat. It does not mean allowing someone to destroy your life's work just because you share the same blood. Tiffany wanted a luxury lifestyle. She wanted the fancy clothes and the bright lights. But she forgot that you cannot have a roof without a foundation. And you cannot have a family without honor. She thought she was being smart. She thought she was being strategic. But in the end, she only proved that a house without a soul, and a house without a working septic system, is just a pile of expensive trash. I am at peace now. I have my books. I have my garden. I have the memory of a man named Bill who loved me enough to protect me even after he was gone. I have realized that the greatest luxury in life is not a walk-in closet. It is a clear conscience. It is the ability to close your eyes at night and know that you have lived with integrity. Note: although this story was created to be engaging and easy to understand, the message and the lesson it carries are what truly matter. The characters might be part of a narrative, but the values of respect and consequences are very, very real. These are the lessons that have lasting value in our world today. If you believe that respect is the most important part of any family, and if you believe that what goes around comes around, then please give this video a like. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in your own family? I would love to hear your wisdom. And finally, do not forget to subscribe to Elderly Stories for more tales of justice, courage, and the American spirit. Thank you for spending your time with me today. May your home always be a place of peace. God bless.